Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about spousal support and the QDRO, the Qualified Domestic Relations Order. These are, I'm not going to say they're rarities, but they don't happen quite as often, at least spousal support doesn't, as things like child support or equitable distribution. So it is unlikely that you're going to have a significant focus on the bar on this, but understand that spousal support may be part of a good bar answer when it comes to a divorce. Okay, so we've talked about spousal support and what the purpose of it is. And the purpose of spousal support is to financially support a spouse who cannot support themselves fully. And so we have that reciprocal support when we get married. We have that financial contract to support each other. And spousal support is the continuation of that even after the parties have decided they don't want to be together after they've separated. Sometimes spousal support just happens during the pendency of the litigation, and sometimes it continues on after that. Okay, so spousal support is going to have the spouse who makes more give money to the spouse who makes less. And in some states, it's pretty limited. For instance, in Indiana, it isn't that common to get spousal support unless we have a situation where we have a stay-at-home mom who needs support to get back on her feet, to get back into the job market. Maybe they've never worked, maybe they need education, or a spouse is disabled. In other states, it's going to be more broad-ranging than that. So we're going to look at, and I'm pulling them up right now. Kentucky has guidelines, and so we are going more towards guidelines in order to determine whether spousal support should be paid, and if so, how much. Whether or not spousal support is going to be paid does bear on the length of the marriage, because someone who is used to getting support, who has been financially supported by the other party for the last 15 years because they've raised kids, or they've stayed home, or because they're disabled, may have a harder time supporting themselves than someone who's only been married 6 months and before that marriage had a full-time job and then just decided they didn't want to work anymore. Those are different situations. Some states, so one term that we use is support. Some states call it alimony. Kentucky calls it maintenance. So we have guidelines in Kentucky, just like child support guidelines, that can help us determine how much support is to be paid. And it is Kentucky has a calculator, just like we might have calculators for child support guidelines as well. So the Kentucky alimony calculator, and I'm reading it right here, looks at the yearly net income of each spouse, looks at pre-existing child support, and that is to outside the marriage, and then it looks at the marriage length in years. So I'm gonna do this in real time for you. So let's say the yearly net income of the first spouse is $60,000. They have no pre-existing child support. The second spouse, let's give them zero yearly net income and also zero child support. So we've got 60 and 0, and the marriage length in years was 1. Okay? The maintenance calculator in Kentucky comes up with a $2,500 maintenance payment to the second spouse per month for 3.6 months. Because it was only a year's marriage. So let's take the same situation, a $60,000 income and a 0 income, and give it a 10-year marriage and calculate alimony. Now, the calculator that I'm looking at is, a monthly maintenance payment of $2,500 for 60 months. That's splitting the income according to this right down the middle. That's a lot. That's way more than it's half. I mean, it's half of, so it's essentially splitting the income with the spouse for the duration of whatever the time period is, and that's a whole lot of money. In Indiana, that would not happen. So take a look at your statutes and case law to determine what maintenance or spousal support or alimony might be where you are. I should have done that before. I like doing it in real time because I'm shocked at how high that is. That's a whole lot of money. But there are other things that bear on that as well. And that's, again, a guideline that isn't mandatory, but it is a guideline, and deviations need to be established. So, okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the QDRO, the Qualified Domestic Relations Order. And I'm going to do that in terms of what we call new property. And we're going to talk about this in a larger discussion of not just new, but intangible property, or property that is hard to split down the middle. Okay, the reason that we need a QDRO is that I can easily split up the equity in a home, but it's far more difficult for me to split between the parties a retirement account, or a pension, or Social Security. A qualified domestic relations order is how we do that, because the problem is, if I take this lump sum of money that's in a 401k, I can take it out and split it, and a QDRO can do that. But if I have it together, I will earn more on it because of the compounded interest. And then when I get divorced, everything that I earn from that point forward on what I owned is mine. But what is gained or lost on the portion that my spouse is entitled to is theirs. So it's not just like they have, let's say there's $20,000 in my retirement account when I get divorced, and the court says, all right, well, 10 goes to one spouse and 10 goes to the other. That would be easy, but we've got valuation that goes up and down over time. And if you have a 401k and you've looked at it recently, you have my sympathies, because they're all down right now. And let's say I don't die for another 40 years. So all the principal that was put in after the date of separation is mine, and all the interest on that portion of it is mine. And the spouse is only entitled to the $10,000 principal and any gain in that $10,000. This is more math than I went to law school to complete. So I have no idea how to get a QDRO taken care of. And I will say that most family law practitioners do not do QDROs. They are very niche, and I had a friend recently get married to someone who'd been previously married, and she came to me about a QDRO. Of course, I asked my friend who's practiced much more recently, Dan Cannon, and I was like, oh, can I have a family lawyer? And he's like, no, the family lawyers that I would recommend you to, they don't even do QDROs because they're so niche. Here's the guy, and he's the only guy, because QDROs are complicated, and they do things like they value this new money appropriately. So this QDRO not only does the QDRO say who owns what in the piece of property that's being divided on divorce, but it also values it fractionally over time. So the QDRO is designed to make valuation of these things that go up and down more readily available, and it's going to put an appropriate amount on each particular portion. Okay. Some of the things that can be difficult to value or value over time. Retirement, pensions, Social Security determinations, Social Security income. And then aside from a QDRO, there are other things that can be difficult to value in terms of what your book calls new property. What about a business and a license for that business? So let's say people get married and they get married while they're in undergrad. So they're between their junior, let's say right after graduation, they graduate undergrad, they get married. And the husband decides to go to law school because he's got a screw loose, right? So the husband goes to law school, wife makes a home, she raises the kids, husband goes to law school, he passes the bar, he gets a license, he practices, he builds his own practice, he has his own firm, he hangs a shingle, and by the time they get divorced 20 years later, mom has never gone back to work because she's taking care of the kids, and she supported him throughout law school, licensure, and the establishment of that business. Mom has not gone to law school. She doesn't know anything about practicing law. She was not the paralegal. She doesn't know anything about it. So if we give her half the business, she doesn't know how to run it. We can pay her out, certainly, but what about the time she spent supporting him getting his license? How do you put a value on that? I don't have any earthly idea. There are certain things, revenue streams. And especially when those streams fluctuate in value, it's easy to, let's say, calculate a revenue stream if it's a lottery payout. And so that payout is just actuarial, and it just gets paid out over time, and it's the same amount. It's proportional. I mean, that's fine. But sometimes revenue streams, like revenue streams from income-based properties, rental properties, any other revenue stream that fluctuates in income can be difficult to value, and so we may need some machinations to figure out who gets what when and who is responsible for debt to these properties. And so those are things that may be difficult to value over time. Okay, I'm gonna take a quick look again. Yeah, so your book goes into a little bit more detail than I feel comfortable doing in terms of how we value this. But understand that how you value the fractional shares of things like a retirement account or goodwill in a business or payment streams is very unlikely to be on a bar exam because it is a very niche thing. You should know what a QDRO does, and it sets aside, it establishes the ownership of these fractional interests in things like retirement accounts, and it values these fractional shares over time. So the QDRO is how we distribute retirement. That's what happens when there's a retirement account at the time of divorce and we need to split it up equally or just split it up in some fashion. That's done through a qualified domestic relations order. Okay. And again, there will be marital and non-marital shares of that. The other things that can also be in this, I'm not quite sure how we're going to separate them, analysis, are military benefits. And military benefits can be pensions, but they can also be military benefits that are assessed when a service member leaves. So if a service member leaves prior to the divorce and they get an adjudication that they are 50% disabled, they can get a payment from the government for the rest of their lives. And it's as common as having sleep apnea. So I was previously married to a sailor while he was getting out of the Navy, and everybody knew that when you get out of the Navy, what you do is you sign up for a sleep study, because if you can show that you have sleep apnea, you're 50% disabled. And while this is not a pension benefit or a pot of 401k money, it is a benefit that was accrued to him while we were married. And he got like an $800 a month payment as a result of that. And so these military benefits may be something to be distributed as well. That wasn't something that chose to distribute, but using ways to value them. Military benefits when someone gets out. I don't know off the top of my head whether a GI Bill benefit would be something that could be split up, because certainly, much like someone who has no legal experience can't run a law firm, someone who is not a former service representative cannot use the GI Bill, but that is an asset. It isn't one that can be sold though, so how do we value it? We have to be creative. All right, so that's new property, qualified domestic relations orders, and a little bit about support. See you next time.